Alvin Rhodes, I'm Tech Service Rep with BASF, and I want to shift gears a little bit into the actual application of Provisia Herbicide from that standpoint. Well, let me say first, we wouldn't be here if it wasn't for Steve Limscomb and all of his staff at LSU through the development stages they've had over the past several years. So we really appreciate that, and it's exciting to see that we're here now. Horizon Ag is going to be doing the marketing process with it, and we've been talking about Provisia for 4 or 5 years now, but now's the year that we're going to be launching it, going into 2018 system and of production. And you know, it may not be a huge amount of seeds, but we want to be able to put it in place to use properly and use the herbicide system properly also. So I'm going to spend a few minutes just talking about the Provisia herbicide aspect of that. You know, it's been since 2002 since the first system was introduced, which was Clearfield for controlling red rice in rice. And now we're looking at Provisia that will not only control the red rice, but any outcrosses. The volunteer rice has been built into it. There are some parallels, but there's a lot of differences in that process too. It is a variety trait that we have to use properly, and we've got a few other little twerks in the application we got to be aware of. But you know, this is a slide taken from this past year. Horizon Ag had a few fields in South Louisiana and a few other places where we're looking at some outcrosses where new path applied in this field on the left did not control it. That's the situation that we've developed Provisia herbicide for in this technology, so that we can control that and put it into a long-term stewardship program, so hopefully we can keep both systems going, because the Clearfield system still works very well. It's still going to be there a long time, but we want to continue both of those. We just have to practice the stewardship practices to do that. But here, of course, this is a field right across the levee from where the Provisia was planted, and this has got Provisia herbicide on it, and it cleaned up the grass side of that and the weedy rice. So that looks good as a start, but we're moving forward in 2018 now looking, and the first thing of that is the stewardship aspect of it. You know, how should we utilize it? Of course, the ideal system that we'd like to be able to use the stewardship is planting soybeans every other year. You're changing not only the herbicides, but the modes of actions and the herbicides that you're using and other cultural practices to go with this. As far as 2018, if they planted soybeans last year and they've got the system, then you know you're in good shape to plant Provisia if that's the situation, and hopefully rotating each year between the two systems for long-term management. But we know that's not always the situation of it. That we have seen in other cases. You know, where we feel like it's going to fit best this year with the limited seed that's available and all is going to be right here where we're going to start, where we've already got a bad case. We've got the weedy rice, or the situations where we've got red rice that can't be controlled with the new PAS system. So that's probably where it's going to go here first. And then if we can put back into a soybean rotation plan in there, good. It may go a couple of different rounds of Provisia. It may go longer than that depending on the situation. We do discourage consecutive years of Provisia because we don't want to encourage a breaking of stewardship there also, so that we know we can get outcrossing with it too if we're not careful with it. There's other situations, of course, eventually to be able to plant Provisia rice followed with Clearfield rice, because we don't have the residual from the Provisia. We just can't do the reverse of that. So that if you're trying to maximize the number of years with rice production, at least 2 out of 3 years from that standpoint, you can get the best from it and do that rotation to help minimize it that's there. But obviously, if you planted Clearfield this past year, use new path or any of those things, we do have the rotation restrictions that this would not be the year to plant Provisia in it. So keep those things from the rotation standpoint and any of the residual compounds that are there. Now, obviously, when we talk about Provisia herbicide, we're talking about grass control. From the standpoint that it's going to do a great job as far as controlling these grasses, some of the ones that stick out first. The reason that it was developed is because of the ALS resistant red rice that has developed throughout crossing, whatever means over the years, that's termed weedy rice in some areas because it can't be controlled. but it's also going to pick up on other red rice, barnyard grass, springletop, and other grasses that are an issue there. So we're excited about the control you're going to get from the grass standpoint with Provisia that we have. Now, Provisia herbicide is quizalofop. It's ACCase inhibitor. Basically, it's not going to affect any broadleaf weeds that are there. You know, it may be very transient sort of effect as far as broadleaves, but as far as grasses, it's pretty good on most any of the grasses that we typically have from the standpoint. It affects that meristem, get that rotten neck effect from that standpoint. Takes a few days usually, but it does work very effectively. And we saw good performance of it in those locations that we had in field uses this past year, as well as in those research trials that's been going on. So as far as what we're going to recommend is what the label will say as far as the application is concerned. We are requiring 2 applications because grass germinates and grows pretty quickly. You've got a period of time before that permanent flood comes into place. You have no residual from the standpoint of Provisia. So it's better to actually start with a command or something early for residual grass control to knock some of those grasses back, maybe have some sharpen in there for some broadleaf activity pre-emerge. But then come in about the 1 to 2 leaf stage as far as Provisia in that first application is concerned. So you'll take down those grasses early and then plan to come back with a second shot before the permanent flood, at least 10 or more days after that point. Now here's an example of a field that was actually done down in Kaplan, Louisiana this past year. And it's about 10 days after the first shot of Provisia was applied, which was put out about 15.5 ounces in that shot. And you see the rice is getting a pretty good stage, but you can also see what's going on there. There was some pretty big red rice that was in that field, and this was some of the ALS resistant outcross grass in that case. It took it down with about those 15 ounces that were there. And so we got that burn down activity. But you can also see that without residual, you're getting more stuff coming back. So this is saying if you don't have any control measures with it, you better be on top of it, because this can be a huge problem if you don't control it from the standpoint of coming back with the second application. So this case, it came back, sprayed it later that same day, put on that flood, and then he did very well, and that was in that earlier slide I showed that looked so clean out there from the grass standpoint. As far as the rate's concerned, as of this point, our rate is 13 to 18 ounces per application's range. We are looking at reducing that down to maybe 13 to 16 ounces. I don't know if it's necessarily important to go as high as 18 ounces. That 13's worked well, depend on the timing and other conditions that are there, and maybe be looking at some other rates. But right now, our newer label that may come out at the next point will say top of 16 ounces in a single application, but a maximum of 31 over the course of the season. So that's basically 2 applications that we're looking at. With the last timing is up to panicle initiation. Crop oil, that was something that we looked at very closely last year. We'd like to see a minimum pint of crop oil in the application, or 1% depending on the water. We see a lot of aerial applications going out where they reduce that water volume pretty low, so we want to make sure we get at least a pint per acre. Stay with the standard crop oil, not we're kind of staying away at this point from some of the high load crop oils so we get a better handle on how those fit and the activity that goes along with that. And of course, application ground minimum of 10, aerial minimum of 5. I'd like to see it up a little bit higher than that if possible, especially when you got some pretty thick grass pressures to make sure you get the coverage that we're maybe dealing with. And grasses can be pretty thick at times. Now, as far as crop response, you know, and as a whole, it's very, very tolerant. We've done a lot of studies as far as applications up to 2 and 3x rates in a single application. It's done very well, but it's not uncommon to see a little bit of yellowing from that standpoint. Here's a couple here. The one on the left, you see what we have called the yellow flash, in that it may be a little bit in that standpoint as it metabolizes it, but in a day or two, it was gone if you see it at all. We saw a couple of cases this past year where it may have been some overlaps of not only the treatment but also the adjuvant to go with it. And we've had some times with some extended cloudy days that may have magnified it, slowed down a little bit of the metabolism of it. So, you may have seen a little bit of that, but it came through it fine, and we're excited that it did real well. But typically, our goal, of course, is control weedy rice or any other grasses that are in there, and we get good tolerance as far as Provisia rice is concerned. There are some watch-outs, obviously, and that's other rice, because you certainly want to treat Provisia rice with Provisia and limit any drift or any other treatment as far as other kind of rice is concerned, because it'll take it out, especially at those rates that we're looking at this there. This is an aerial application that we did intentionally just to see what it would do on the Mermentile versus the Provisia rice right beside of it, and it certainly takes some watching, but that's true with other crops. I guess one of the biggest issues that we always get asked about is tank mixes. What can mix with Provisia? We know it's a grameticide. Typically, those type compounds don't mix well with a whole lot of stuff until you can get some antagonism issues. So we do want to minimize that as best as possible. We have seen basically very limited, if any, antagonism when mixed with Prowl or Permit. So that has looked very good, and I know Permit particularly is used pretty commonly, and Prowl is in a lot of areas, and not seen so much antagonism there. We've seen others, not that much, but in some cases, I've got some of them listed here. It may be others that are there, whether it be the facet sharpened lead, Basagran, and a few others that have done okay with it. But I would say if you're tank mixing, do it in that first application, because if there's any antagonism that goes on, then it's going to limit the grass control as far as the antagonism. You can clean it up with that second shot, so that don't put it in with the second one. Go with that first one to help minimize any of those issues that are there. The biggest watch-outs we have as far as tank mixing, and the ones that causes the greatest amount of antagonism, anything with propanil, or triclopyr in it. And here's some of those that have some of those in it, but we've also, I know Eric Webster saw even more with grass and regimen in it. I don't think Jason Bond saw as much of that antagonism. I'm not so sure about Arkansas, but I know they've done a lot of work with it also. But those are more of our watch-outs that have greater amounts. But in any case, watch any of those compounds that you may have. Now, as far as mixing with a herbicide, another thing, the lower the Provisia rate, the greater a chance of antagonism you may get when it's tank mixed with another compound. So if you do use it, and in some cases they recommend don't tank mix at all, but if you do use it, keep that rate of Provisia up, because that'll help overshadow a little bit of that chances for antagonism that is there. Don't go to the 10 or 13 ounces. Keep it up to that 15, and that would help. But put it in that first of those two applications, as I mentioned. And if we go a split application, that's probably the best. If you've got a concern with another herbicide you may be using to tank mix for or look at for broadleaf control, spray Provisia first, wait 24 hours, and then come back with the other broadleaf material that's there. Then you've had time to absorb into that grass, so you don't get any issues with that, and then you come back to treat those broadleaf weeds the next day with that. If you do the reverse of that, you may have to wait a week or some cases longer as far as applying Provisia after the broadleaf material. And of course, that grass is growing a lot during that week of time. Now, here's a few watch-outs that I just want to make note of. As far as Provisia, the type chemistry it has very good post-emerge activity, but don't count on it for residual activity, because it's not like New Path in the Clearfield system. You get a little bit of both. This is just going to give that post-emerge activity that's there, but it does very good from that aspect. Use the standard crop oil that's there. It's worked very well. We're evaluating other things as time goes on, but we want to make sure that it works and keep those rates at least a minimum of a pint per acre. Don't overlap. We saw a few cases where they did a little much overlapping in some of these corners this past year, and no telling what kind of rate was on it. The multi-overlaps in some cases, but just limit that from the standpoint as best you can. And avoid drift to sensitive crops, and that's true with many different crops. Now, one of the things too is to watch out for is when you put on that flood after the second shot, because it didn't have residual, and if you spray Provisia out there, then it's going to kill the grasses up, but it's not going to kill those that are just about to come up and are germinating at that point. So make sure you try to get that water on immediately, and if it takes a week or 10 days to flood that field, you may have a few grasses that kind of pop up. So that's a little watch out there. Flood it as quickly as you can so you minimize that. And don't spray pre-plant with it. Keep it in crop because it's going to do better as far as control in season, post-applied to burn down those grasses. Don't use that irrigation water, a restriction we have, to go to drain it off and flood other rice with that. So just a few little watch outs from that standpoint. Now, as I said, just kind of recap the rates. I'd say with that 13 to 15 ounces per acre as far as the rates typical concern, and in those two applications that you're after. But again, don't go that low into the rate if you happen to be tank mixing it, which may be something you don't want to do either. That early post is critical. I've heard some say, well, can I get by with one shot and just spray it right before I flood? You can do that. You may get fairly good control of those grasses, but the weed competition effects you've already had from that early season thing may already have some impact on that rice crop at that point from the competition and yield impact later down the road. So hit it early, then hit it again later for the best control in the yield aspects of it. And as far as the sequential, the second shot should be mid-post right before the flood. You can go, after flood up to panicle initiation. It is labeled for that. The only watch out there is if it's flooded and you barely have a little bit of that grass sticking up, it may not cover it enough, so you may not get controls there. So it better be water dropped so that you can get good coverage of it from that standpoint and then pull it back up. But if you can, time it earlier to get that greatest activity. And of course, tank mix partners, we talked about that. Watch out for the antagonism. If you do use it, put in that first shot, and then hopefully your second shot should be able to minimize any of those issues and recover from it. As far as stewardship, it's going to be extremely important, just as it was with Clearfield. Has a lot of parallels with the timing and all those type requirements for stewardship, to buy the certified seed and the herbicide to go with it as a pair-up thing. Make those proper applications, use good management practices as you would. And I'm not getting into that, but as far as the management, but look at the nutrient, the nitrogen. It may be a little bit different than what you've been dealing with as far as the Clearfield is concerned. And we'll obviously Horizon Ag is going to be talking a lot about that in the meetings they'll have when they introduce it. But rotate out. Don't have consecutive years of Provisia if you want to maintain good stewardship for the long haul. And that's what we're about from that standpoint. We're excited. It's a new technology. It's finally here. We've been talking about it for a while, and I think it's going to be a great supplement to the Clearfield system that is already there and going strong, and we can put them both in the system for the long haul. So that's a little review of our herbicide. Any questions? Yes, sir.
It's probably more for Steve, but if you've tested this along the line and then you take yields and then you compare them to the real world, let's say out in the field, is this Provisia line capable of 150 or 60 bushel yield, do you think?
I think that's a good ballpark. If you treat it right, put a blast fungicide on it just to make sure you cover it there, I think it's very realistic, 150, perhaps a little bit more.
Steve, just to add to that, we had a really good year. Normally I can't grow rice very good. I don't like telling people that, but we cut exactly 155. We had a fungicide on it, looked really good, especially when you looked at well, it was not red rice, but we planted a conventional in there, when you looked at the control. It cut, the plots were between 155 and 160.
Did you try this with the new oil in your second
We
application?
had no, we put it in the first application. I'm with Alvin on that. I think most tank mixes should go with the first application if possible, but we have done some of that, and I didn't have a problem with it. But I'm answering your question.
Oh, no, that's all right.
Well, we had a-
I'm talking about this in my section at 130.
You're the one that.
The antagonism, you can drive yourself to bananas trying to test for antagonism. I mean, it comes and goes, but since Lent has, barnyard grass activity and activity in a lot of these other weeds too, I didn't see any antagonism with Lent.
No, we looked at it a few years ago, not that much. But one thing that you have to watch out for, environment makes a big impact on antagonism. Some years you may see some of it, and some years you may not. So, in leading into that, you got to be a little bit cautious of it. And I know the auxins, like propanil and those things, we have a little bit more concern about. Hadn't seen quite as much with the oil side of it.
Also, so we had a seed field that went over 170. And so it's got the capability. It's just this year we under-fertilized it, I think, because I didn't have a lot of data on that. And then we overplanted seed rate on things. So I think when we had it planted at good time, or which planted too late, it's possible. We've got some potential there.
I just converted
We'll talk
from
about
barrels
it
to bushels, and on our foundation field of Crowley, it was right at 160. So I think the only, and I can't overstress this, in Alvin, had a field that did very similar to what our foundation field did. The only big issue we had is a field that, we had quite a bit of blast in South Louisiana this year, and didn't use blast fungicide. Used fungicide, but it wasn't a blast fungicide. We had some issues in that field. So if you got any potential for blast disease, you're growing this thing, you need to use the blast fungicide.
All right, well, we thank y'all for coming in the back.